Cool. All right, everyone, as Michael said in the introduction, I'm going to be doing a weathering demo today. So last year at DroidCon, some of you may remember the weathering panel that I did, which was just me sitting up here and talking about like the theory behind it and the different ways you can go about it. And I asked people for feedback, and one of the questions I got was if I could do like a live demo. So this year I'm going to be doing that. We're going to run through a few different techniques and methods and stuff. And then after this, some of you have probably seen it online. I'm doing a hands-on workshop where you guys can actually come try stuff in the soldering room with all the different stuff I have up here for the different methods that I'm going to show you. That is limited by capacity for that room. So I was told it's a max capacity of 18, but I'm sure not everybody's going to be in there for the full hour. So if you didn't sign up, go ahead and stop by throughout the hour, and if there's space, come on in and you can give stuff a try. All right, I'm going to do a little recap of some of the stuff that I covered last year because I think it's important context for when you get into actually putting paint or whatever on your droid or prop or whatever you're weathering. So it really helps to think about how things get dirty in the real world. So these pictures up here that you can see are some real world objects, and they get dirty in different ways. And I've kind of outlined the different, like I kind of categorize the types of dirt and grime that objects will pick up. So there's dry dust and dirt buildup, which you can kind of see in some of those. It's tougher to pick out because usually that's kind of like a finer particulate. There is wet buildup, which is like mud. So you think Dagobah R2. And then you have staining, which is like that one on the far right, where there's sort of this nasty stain coming out from that drainage hole. You have rust, which is or just any oxidation in general. That can be like you think copper with that cool kind of turquoise patina. And then you get paint chipping and wear, and then you get actual physical damage from dents and scratches and stuff like that. So with all of those things, you also have to think about how and why the objects actually get dirty with whatever one of those categories you're thinking of. So this list is all kinds of things that I think about when I'm weathering a droid or whatever. You think about where that weathering is going to be. So if you look at R2 in any of the scenes where he's weathered, there are a couple where he's fairly clean, but weathering is not an even thing. It builds up differently in different areas of the object. So low points or crevices and stuff, that is where dirt and grime is going to build up, just like stuff in the real world. You also want to think about the base material that the object is supposed to be. I mean, usually for us as droid builders, we're oftentimes trying to mimic materials that aren't actually what the droid is made out of. So like you have a 3D printed droid and you're trying to make it look like it's metal. So you're going to want to weather it in ways that would be consistent with how real world metal things get weathered. And then that actually ties into like paint chipping and stuff. You want to expose that underlying metal. The surrounding environment is also something to think about. I'm going to use R2 as an example again, because we're all super familiar with them. You think about Dagobah R2, and he's got a whole bunch of mud and grime buildup because he's moving around in a swamp. And then you look at R2 on Tatooine, and it's more kind of finer orangey color because he's built up with dust and sand and things like that. So when you're trying to give your droid a backstory, you want to take the actual environment into account to inform your weathering. The last few points on there are kind of more actual like application tips that I have. So weathering should not just be an additive thing. Real world objects don't just have buildup. They'll get stuff like dirt and mud and grime built up on them, and then they keep on doing whatever their purpose is, and they rub against things or someone comes to clean it, and that'll take that dirt and grime off the high points, but it leaves it down in those crevices and stuff. And then looking at that weathering itself, especially that bumper on the bottom there, that's really, really beat up. But none of those shapes that you see, the chips in the paint, those are not like, none of them are a circle or a square or whatever. They're irregular, random shapes. And that is really like, that's the randomness of how the world works, you know? You're not going to have regular patterns or regular shapes for your weathering. Another one I want to highlight too is the always two there are, the start of that quote that Yoda says. There's pretty much never anything that only gets dirty in one way. Like you look at your car and it's got dust on it from dust on the road being kicked up. It's got bugs on the windshield. It's got marks on it from raindrops, or you got dings on your door or something. Those are all different methods. And when you mix different methods or even just different colors, it gives this kind of layered effect, like there are multiple things affecting how this piece looks. And that's a really important way to go about it too. So today for the demo, I have a few different things that I'm going to be doing. I'm going to start with probably the most basic, which is an acrylic wash. You can also do washes with oil paints and stuff, but I'm going to be doing acrylic just because I prefer it as far as that specific paint goes. I'm going to showcase how physical damage can work in conjunction with washes and stuff. So washes will highlight scratches and things like that. I'll do some dry brushing. And then I have some rust too. I know a lot of people are curious about Dirty Down products. So I have a couple different things from Dirty Down today. They were kind enough to donate some, and we'll have some in the workshop for people to check out too. And they also gave us a discount code for DroidCon too. So if you use DroidCon 10, you can try this stuff for a little cheaper than usual. It's definitely not as cheap as acrylic paint and stuff. But yeah, so I have some of their sprays as well as some of the like the brush on rust stuff that we'll look at as well. First, like I said, we're going to go with washes. I'll start with the acrylic stuff, then I'm also going to demonstrate the Dirty Down spray here too. So a wash, for those of you who don't know, it's just diluted paint. So you can do that with acrylic paints and water or alcohol, or you could use an oil paint and different solvents and stuff for the same effect, but you just have to work with the chemical properties of different paints. And this is something you kind of do over the whole surface, but because it's a liquid, it tends to collect in those crevices. So let's go ahead. If you want to switch over.
I'm going to switch you over.
Yeah.
Here we go. There.
Okay. So I have this swatch here. This was cut by my friend Craig, and I have these in the workshop room too for people to test out on. But this is just meant to mimic like panel lines on an astromech to kind of show you guys how stuff will collect in there. And I'm going to start with these acrylic washes. I already mixed these. These are just normal acrylic paints. I think, yeah, so you guys can see. So just a black. It's worth mentioning, be careful with which black paints that you pick, because some of them are warmer or cooler, and some of them are like more or less pigmented. So like Dirty Down makes a black spray. I personally don't like it because there's a lot of blue hues in that pigment. And if you hit it with a solvent or like try and sand some of it off, it sometimes brings out that blue color, which just to me it doesn't align with like the carbon scoring type stuff that you see in Star Wars. But yeah, so these washes, I have one here that's just black paint, and then one here that is brown with a little bit of black in there just to darken it up. I typically like burnt umber, and sometimes I'll mix in some like more mustardy colors or some greens, depending on what look I'm going for with the weathering. So we'll start with this black wash. So you can use really just any brush for this. You can also put it in a spray bottle if you're doing a larger surface. Like when I weather full astromechs and stuff, I'll just use a spray bottle and go at it and coat larger sections of the droid. But it works on a smaller scale too with paints. So you just want to like dab it on, and you'll see how, I don't know how well you can see it in there. you can see how it'll kind of flow down into the panel lines, like this edge here. And that's where it's going to collect, and you're going to give it a second to sort of set, and then you want to remove it because you don't want, like, this is not weathering, right? It just looks like you put black paint on there. So you want to take it back off, and I usually use paper towel. You can use pretty much anything. You can use actual fabric, and you see if you just kind of gently rubber blot the surface, it pulls it back off, but still kind of leaves more down in those crevices. And you can do multiple passes of this to build up. So usually I'll kind of do an overall pass, and then I will hit specifically like the corners and crevices to get extra buildup in there. It is worth mentioning too, you don't necessarily want this to look like there's brush strokes. That's not how things get dirty in the real world. So you want to be cognizant of that. But you see as I like blot it off, and it's also important to blot, not wipe, because that'll leave like brush stroke looking marks too. But as you blot this off, you can see how I'm kind of leaving it in those corners and crevices. And this obviously still looks really, really heavily weathered compared to like this clean white surface. And I'm going to let it dry for a second and then kind of show you what you can do about that. So let's go, well, here. While that's drying, I'm going to do the bottom half with some black, or not some black, sorry, some brown on top of the black. And that will kind of show you guys how layering different colors can really change the look. So again, this is just like a burnt umber acrylic paint, and it looks obviously more muddy than like the black carbon scoring. So put some of that on there and blot that off. And this really is like a pretty quick process. And when you're doing larger surfaces, it might take longer because you're just doing larger areas, but yeah. And also, this is kind of illustrating my point. You see how where I put the brown wash, it actually kind of took some of the black off with it. That's because this is like they're both just diluted acrylics. And when you put any solvent on acrylic paint, when it's on the surface, whether that be alcohol or water, it's still going to help it come off, even if it's something that's pigmented like another wash. So I'm going to put a little more on here and blot this off, and then show you guys another method of taking this back off. So I really, really like scotch-brite pads for doing this. You can use actual sandpaper. You can use just a damp paper towel with either water or alcohol. But once that is on there, you can just go back and hit it with some sandpaper. Oh, it's still a little wet, and you can see how it gets that kind of like smear on it. So let me hit the top half here. But I'm going to do this, and it takes that back off, but it still leaves it in the crevices. And you don't really want to like cram whatever abrasive you're using down in there, because then it'll start to dig it out of those crevices. But you can see how even just a couple of passes of sandpaper really leaves it in the crevices and stuff, like down here in those corners. And that gives that sort of like, you almost get an airbrush type look with some of R2's areas when it's built up in those corners. But it's a little bit more irregular than that round shape you get with an airbrush. And then obviously with doing this, you don't need a ton of equipment. You don't need to set up a compressor or deal with any of that. So acrylic washes are a really, really easy, approachable method because they're easy to mix, easy to put on, and then also easy to remove if you don't end up liking what it looks like. All right, let me go ahead, and before I do the dirty down spray, so this is just an X-Acto blade, and I'm going to go ahead and make some scratches here, which that's kind of a terrible noise. I don't know if you guys can hear that over the mic. But I'm going to make a couple little dings on like corners here and stuff, and some scratches in there. Yeah, you guys in the front row can definitely hear it. I don't know if the mic picks it up, but it's not a great noise. Or you can kind of like carve out little chips on corners. And then I have a file too. You can use a file as well to get some gouges in there. And I'll just run it along the edge to kind of dig in a groove. And then I'll go back over this with a wash, and you'll see how, like, you probably can't really even see the, you can't really even see the scratches that I made with the X-Acto blade. But once I hit it with this wash, you'll see how those little imperfections that I added on there really bring out, or are brought out by the washes, because it makes a crevice for that acrylic to stick in, basically, or whatever, not necessarily acrylic. So you can start to see it kind of showing up, and sometimes I'll hit those areas more just to give them a little bit extra pigment in there. Blot this off. Yeah, so you can see how, like, this wider scratch here, that's actually not really picking up that well on the camera. Sort of washed out. That's okay. And you guys can come and take a look at this after too. And it might be better as the wash dries and actually like settles in there and gets more matte, because yeah, you can't really see that well. All right, next I'll go through the Dirty Down spray on here. So this, it is an aerosol can, but it's not like spray paint. It doesn't make a ton of fumes. It comes out pretty opaque, and of course, if you go over it more, it's gonna end up being even more opaque. But I'll spray some on the back here. So this stuff is really nice. It is alcohol based, so you have to be careful putting it over certain paints. Like if you guys use Montana Gold, that's an acrylic based spray paint, and it'll actually soften that surface a little bit. So if you spray this stuff on there and then go back with like some sandpaper, try and take it off, it'll hurt your base coat too. We'll give it a second to dry, and you can see it, like this is their mid brown. It almost looks kind of green. But once that dries, you can, I don't know if this is dry enough yet, but you can go back over with an abrasive and take it off just like you would with a wash. And the reason I did this on the back, I'm gonna hit the same area again. So you can kind of see it actually just because I hit it with that, with the same spray again. This is just isopropyl alcohol in a spray bottle. And if you do like a little mist on there from kind of far away, see how it gets that kind of like moisture pitting look almost? That's kind of the big advantage of a spray like this Dirty Down stuff, in my opinion. And the finer the coat of the spray, the less defined those circles will be. So let me go ahead and do just a little quick light pass here. And then I will spray with, yeah. So you can see how much that really brings it out. And again, with that being washed out, you lose some of the contrast. This stuff does dry pretty fast, which is nice. But I'm gonna go ahead and hit it with some sanding, and that'll also kind of fade those pitting marks. But it's a good way to add some like texture and sort of subtle definition to your surfaces. The other thing as well, if you go over this Dirty Down spray with a wash, especially if your wash is alcohol based, it'll take that Dirty Down spray off. It's not necessarily a very tough paint. But yeah, and let me see if I hit it again. Sometimes if you hit the Dirty Down spray with the alcohol before it's really fully set, then you get more defined circles too. Yeah, so those are a little bit more subtle. And again, I don't know how well you're really able to see that. Yeah, and yeah, now you guys can see those scratches too. Yeah, I should have been doing this all along. Yeah, so I like to refer to this look as like the Legacy Effects weathering, because Legacy Effects, who does like all the costumes for The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett and pretty much all the US-based productions, they really, really love this type of look. Another way you can achieve the same effect is if you spray like watered down alcohol-based inks through an airbrush and get that same kind of sort of translucent coat, and then you can spritz it with alcohol again, or even run just plain clear alcohol through your airbrush very lightly, same kind of effect. But this dirty down spray just kind of puts it all in a can for you, so you don't have to deal with an airbrush and stuff. Okay, so I think next I'm going to do a little bit of dry brushing. So dry brushing, and actually I'm realizing now I should have brought a silver paint, but I did not. So dry brushing refers to just kind of making like some subtle, small little scratches. So I'm going to do this with some black acrylic, and you don't need very much paint at all. It's called dry brushing because you put some paint on the brush and then mostly dry it off. You get like all the paint off of the brush. So you can see I just have the acrylic in there and I got some of the paintbrush and I'm just wiping most of it off. You can do it on whatever you're putting your paint on. I'll do it on a paper towel a lot. And then you can use that brush. I'd like to use a rougher brush for it because you get kind of this bristly effect to create more random scratches. And you just hit the edge really lightly. And you kind of want to do it in like the direction that the scratches would form in. And it kind of makes it look like stuff has been scuffing up against your part. And I think I may have overdone it just a little bit there. But yeah, you can kind of see it over here. I don't know how well that's showing up. I can do it with this too. So it's kind of basically just painting scratches, but utilizing the randomness of the bristles to do that for you instead of having to deliberately like map out where you want your scratches. So I'm going to use this smaller brush here and then kind of redo it. And it makes an almost like faded scratch mark versus like if you were to just paint black acrylic on or something. I use this a lot for like blaster marks or dings and stuff. Yeah, you can kind of see it there a little bit. See that diagonal line? Oh, it helps if I angle this a certain way. Yeah, right down here by my finger, you can see that scuff. So that's like if something bumped into it, or there's a little like charred ember or something that was wiped off, or yeah, like I said, you can do it in bigger swaths around a darker black center to kind of make it look like a blaster burn mark or something like that. Before I move on to the rust paint, does anybody have any questions on the stuff I've done so far?
Do you, like when you did the white, for example, did you put a clear coat over that before you weather?
You can. So this was just styrene. This was just plain white styrene, so I didn't have a base coat down. It depends on what the paint is. If I know it's a tougher paint for that base coat, then I won't do anything to clear coat it. If it's a more intricate paint job, and I know that I'm going to be like scuffing up the weathering to take it back and I don't want to hurt that more delicate paint job underneath, then I will clear coat it sometimes. Go with a matte clear because that'll, like if you do a gloss, like it's much harder to get any washes or anything to stick to it. But yeah, you can do that to protect your underlying paint from any abrasives that you may be using to weather it.
So follow up with that. So if I paint my droid in acrylic, and then I want to use some dirtying down with the alcohol based, that's where you'd use the matte based clear coat.
Yeah, you can use a clear coat there. Just be careful with the clear coat as well, because like if you buy a Montana clear coat or an MTN 94 clear coat, those are also acrylic based. So that will also eat it. But if you do like an enamel clear and if you're doing 2K, like a catalyzed clear like that, that'll really, really seal it in. And then you don't have to worry about the dirty down.
Okay.
Yeah. You just have to think a little bit about your chemical properties of your paint to make sure the stuff that you're layering isn't going to hurt other stuff underneath. Okay, if there's no other questions, I'll move on to the rust. So this is that dirty down rust paint. They make a normal like orange rust, like this one. They have a yellow rust, and then there is like a turquoise for coppery patina or like battery corrosion kind of stuff too. This stuff is a little bit funky to work with. It's a very thick paint, and there's this, it's like a syrupy mass in there, and there's actually a ball like in a spray paint can to get this mixed up. They recommend that you use like one of those little centrifugal mixer things for model paints and stuff. I typically don't do that. I just shake it for like 2 minutes. You can also stir it up, popsicle stick or something to loosen up that little ball in the bottom to help it get mixed faster. So you paint it on, like I said, it is pretty thick and it looks terrible when you first put it on. But I don't know what kind of solvents they use in here or what. But it basically like dries and kind of makes itself crusty. I'm actually going to put it over here on the already weathered side. So I'm going to make it extra thick here. And you'll see we're going to have to kind of wait a second to let it dry. So you want to make these sort of irregular shapes too, because you think about rust, it's not as jagged as like some paint chips and stuff, but it's still not very, very smooth edges. And you can even dry brush this stuff too, which I've done. If you look at Mo, the graffiti droid out there, he's got this restraining bolt mark on the front of him. And that was all layered, dirty down rust paints. I used the normal rust, the yellow, and the turquoise stuff in layers to build that up and get that like crusty ring. And then you can also use it kind of like dry brushing to get like a smeared sort of streak on there. Yeah, let's see. This isn't the most authentic looking rust shape, but you can already see, and the reason I did it over the weathered area is because if you do it over, like rust kind of changes the color of what it's over. It does a little bit of staining too. So when I did it just on the white, it kind of just turns out orange. But when you do it over some area that already has a wash, and this is still drying, you can see how it's still a little glossy. You can see how it's getting that kind of matte, crusty, built up sheen. And I'm gonna do another pass on top of it to build it up some more. This stuff I find you really want to do in layers to get that build up effect. And it is worth mentioning too, this is a really cool paint. Rust is pretty rare in Star Wars. If you look at the overall aesthetic of things and how props were weathered in the original trilogy, there's not a ton that has a lot of rust. I mean, you look like the Sandcrawler and stuff, it's got a whole bunch of rust. But a lot of the droids stick more with like the carbon scoring and dirt buildup rather than actual rust. Yeah, I wish this was a little clearer because you can't really see, if the light hits it a certain way, you can kind of see how there's like changes in elevation there, right? Because you build up these layers in that syrupy paint and that gives you that textured rusty finish on there.
Do you ever add any kind of like particulate to make it look?
Not with this. And actually, can you switch back to the slideshow really quick? So if I go down to the rust slide, the image on the right there, you can mix like your own rust kind of looking paint without this stuff, just with some acrylic. And I will take literal dirt and crumble it up in there. The area I live in's got a lot of clay in the soil, so it works well. I crumble it up in there to give it some texture, and I get this sort of thick glob of acrylic paint that's ended up colored like rust with some of that texture in there, and I build that up and then hit that with a wash after to get some of that color variation in there. But you can get a very believable rusty look even without this paint. And actually, so that one on the right, that is with the acrylic paint. The one in the middle, that's that restraining bolt mark that I mentioned, which was all done using this dirty down stuff. So it was me building up that ring and then just kind of like light dry brushing to smear that down to make it look like a drip stain from that rust. And then, yeah, the stuff on the right, that was that acrylic with some grit mixed in there, and then hit with some brown and orange washes on top of it to get a little more color variation than just that acrylic would give it. Because really, if you look at rust, like it's not all just rusty orange. There's like some almost black, some really dark browns, some brighter orange specks, and you want to get that variation in there if you're trying to replicate it. Yeah. Any other questions? That's kind of everything. Go ahead. Yeah.
So once you're done with it,
Yep.
you clear cut over that?
Yes, I will a lot of the time. Sometimes I don't if there's a lot of silver in the weathering. So you can do a lot of dry brushing with silver to get like scratches that would expose underlying metal, like that kind of look. And you want to be careful clear coating over that because that will dull your silver finishes. But usually I will try and clear coat over just to protect it because a lot of times these acrylics aren't as durable as spray paints. So if you want your droid to stay weathered, a clear coat always helps. Anybody else with questions? Cool. That being said, anyone who's signed up for the weathering workshop, we can go get started on that now. And like I said, if people did not sign up, just stop by and see if there's room in the soldering room there. Because if there is, I mean, you're more than welcome to come in and try this stuff. Yeah. But
Will the PowerPoint that you didn't show, will it be available online?
I don't know, will it? Yeah, I can share it. Honestly, a lot of the slides are very similar to what I had in there last year. But yeah, I can post that up online and we can get it out somehow. Maybe I'll share it to the Astromech Facebook group.
Yeah, that probably be good. If you share it to the
Yeah.
Facebook group, then
Yep.
yeah, because I did share this exact video is actually shared on several different groups.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll get that posted up there. And that way you guys can have those notes for reference too. Cool. Thank you, everybody.
Round one, everybody.